The making of the kitchen, which is what this video is all about, started a few weeks ago. Other tasks which we should sensibly have been doing first were held pending deliveries or me getting round to ordering things, so we thought we'd at least make a start on building the kitchen carcass, even though it was then going to be put on the back burner for other tasks as parts were received. On the day of the first bit of footage you're about to see, our first task was to define the dimensions of the carcass. That sounds quite a relatively simple thing to do, but we couldn't even define the height until we knew what the thickness of the work surface was going to be. So we spent quite a bit of time going back over all the work surface options until we'd come to a decision that allowed us to define the height. The length of the unit was pretty straightforward, but its depth really created some issues for us because there's so few perpendicular surfaces in a van. A spirit level is a very limited use, and there are pillars in the way, and again it's just difficult measuring with accuracy distances that are really quite critical. So I'll hand over to the footage where I try to explain some of those issues. Excuse the rather loud sound of an alarm going off in the background. It seems quite straightforward what we're trying to achieve here, which is there's going to be an upright against the end of the wheel arch box thing that is going to form the left-hand support for the kitchen. There's going to be an intermediate support somewhere here. Again, it's going to be an upright that will also serve as a cupboard divider, and then the end of the kitchen is going to be on this line here. That's going to be the right-hand end support. Now that sounds quite simple in principle, but of course I'd like to blame the distraction of the alarm going off in the background for losing my ability to string together a coherent sentence at this point. I was trying to say that it's difficult to measure the desired dimensions accurately when so little is square. We were having particular issues with measuring for the right-hand end support, as the door is set further back than the panel below the rear window. The door pillar also caused us problems, as we didn't have a large enough set square to work out how much further back the pillar is set at the height where the work surface will be, compared with its position at floor level. We've been struggling a little bit to try and get something we're happy with is an accurate measurement on that. So we're going to go and start cutting, and as we've done before, we'll see what happens.
Right, we started off trying to work out exactly where the kitchen unit was going to go and where the doors are going to go, the cupboards, etc. And that led us down to the back here, where the gas locker is going to be. Gail's underneath at the moment, as you can see, trying to work out where the vent for the gas locker can go.
Measure twice, cut once, particularly when it involves a hole in the bottom of your vehicle. That's Mick. I've just put an X marks the spot on the bottom, and Mick was just checking that he agrees that that is a good place to drill through. We've just spent a good half an hour or so measuring and thinking about the gas locker. We've worked out where we can put the dropout vent, and we've also worked out that there is nowhere else in the kitchen area where we can put that dropout vent, so the dropout vent has to be down in that corner there. We've been having some discussions about materials, whether we use 5mm ply, whether we use some 3mm aluminium or steel sheet, and we're coming to the conclusion that what we need to do is gain ourselves a bit more space. We've now spent somewhere in the region of an hour coming up with about 80 different possible solutions to the gas locker, and what I've now decided I'm going to achieve today is taking that box that has already taken far too long in its construction, and I'm going to make it about 2 centimetres shorter. The advantage that gives is that we can then put in a piece of 12mm ply across there that will flush up to the edge of the box. That will form the left-hand edge of the kitchen. It means we won't have any joins that we need to worry about how to seal on that edge of the gas locker. Finally happy that we could just about squeeze the gas locker into the space available, it was time to commit our measurements to wood and get cutting so that construction on the main kitchen carcass could begin. So far we've cut 3 sheets of wood, which are going to be the end, which is going over there up against that wheel arch box, which is now cut down. There's this middle piece which we can see in place because we're just marking where it's going to sit on the battens, and then there is another piece that is going to go up this end. That is going to be braced together using some battens. You can see there's going to be one across the floor at the front, there's the one at the back, and there's also going to be one at the front at the top. It's just a few minutes later and we've now just added in another piece of batten. The only reason for that one is that in the interest of securing this down well, we've attached the front and back battens, back and front, with these joining blocks so that we can bolt the assembly into the original seat bolt holes. With the foundation fixed in position on the floor, the rest of the construction of the carcass took place in situ so that we could be sure that everything was being screwed together in exactly the right positions. If you deduce a degree of faffing with the drill in this time-lapse footage, that's because I was drilling pilot holes, then changing bit for the countersink, then changing bit again to drive in the screw, and I was doing this sequentially for each fixing point in turn to make sure that no measurement was thrown out by the preceding fixing. That's as far as we've got today. We've got a nice sturdy kitchen unit there. We've now worked out that the depth of the sink is fine if we have a piece of wood in at the back there. It was something that was difficult to measure until we had everything else in place, but now that we have been able to measure that, we can put that extra support at the back. So that's the first thing we'll be doing tomorrow. The result of all the measuring you see me doing here is that we were happy with the job we'd done on the carcass. The construction on this piece is mainly screwed through. There are some places, particularly in the middle, where the batten runs straight through the middle divider of the cupboard, so we've just used L brackets to hold that piece in place. Again, at the other end it's screwed through, and then just some pocket holes to hold these pieces, which are what anchors the whole thing to the floor. That's a hole through the floor for the dropout vent for the gas locker. Forgot to take any footage of me cutting it, so just imagine me with a drill in my hand and a hole cutter. So that will slot in there, a couple of screws in it, a bit of sealant round. But first we need to just treat those raw edges of metal below. What I've just gone through there is 2 layers of 12mm plywood, a great big lump of adhesive, and the metal of the floor of the van. I've not recorded the making of the gas locker. It's involved a huge amount of measuring, quite a bit of head scratching and a bit of wood cutting, gluing and screwing, and this is where we're at the moment. As you can see, it's quite a tight fit to get the gas bottle in there, but it does go and we can lift it in and out, which is what was important. If I go from above, you'll see that this is an odd shape for a gas locker. The reason for that is, and I think it might be too dark for you to see, oh, you can see some daylight there. That just there is the hole we've just cut for the dropout vent. The only place that dropout vent could go was just round that corner, and as this needs to be a fully enclosed locker, we've had to make it this odd shape. All of the joints in this locker will be sealed, and the door will be sealed on the front as well. Now this is where having the longer wheelbase Expert Tepee would have been handy, because what we've had to do here is actually take a notch out the back of the locker, and we're going to have to extend that a little bit further, because when the tailgate comes down there's a bit of shaping to the tailgate here and it's just catching this edge. The other issue we've had to contend with here is that none of these walls run perpendicular to the floor, so it looks like we've got a massive gap here, but actually at the bottom this piece of wood is up against this pillar. What we're now about to do is cut the shelf that's going to form the lid of the gas cupboard and also provide a shelf in the kitchen. Here's the kitchen unit so far, and I think the whole of the right hand side of the kitchen unit probably took about a third as long as that gas locker arrangement. Still needs actually screwing to the kitchen unit and sealing all around. And it is far from perfect, but I challenge anybody with the shapes that you have to deal with there to get everything exactly as it should be. It will certainly do the job, and therefore have to be happy with that. This morning we cut the front fascia panel for the kitchen cabinet, and Mick is just working out where we now need to cut holes in that for the cupboard doors, whilst I'm currently running the gas pipe through the carcass. We've now lost the sun, but what we do have is a piece of fascia board. This is the back side we're looking at, so we've drawn all over it, and these are the cutouts we're going to make for the cabinet doors. Just marking where we're going to drill holes to give saw access. After we'd carefully marked the positions, I drilled holes in all 4 corners of each door opening, going halfway through the wood from the back, then flipping it over to finish the job from the front, so as not to rip the wood when the bit burst through. I used a 32mm diameter bit, so those holes didn't just provide access points for the jigsaw blade, but also provided rounding of the corners. Cutting the apertures with the jigsaw was a bit of a chore, and I cursed the poor quality of my jigsaw. Almost all of my tools are cheap and unbranded models, and they've all provided excellent service over a lot of projects over a lot of years. However, I reckon the jigsaw is head and shoulders the worst quality item I own, and you have to pay a great care, watching the blade like a hawk, to make sure it cuts where you want it to. First thing the next morning, I went and bought some new jigsaw blades and, impulsively, a new jigsaw too. Then I got home and looked at the spec of my existing saw and found it to be almost identical to the one I'd just bought. The new one likely would have been easier to use, but I figured I'd managed thus far with my old one, so could manage some more. So the new one got consigned to being returned, and I fitted a new, expensive, high-quality blade into my old saw. What a difference! It still takes effort to keep it on the line, the guide is still useless, and the base plate is completely squiff, but it cuts a whole lot more efficiently. With all of the holes now cut into the fascia panel for the front of the kitchen carcass, we thought we'd cut some doors. You'll also see here, and in subsequent footage, that another purchase I'd made that morning was a large set square. I've managed with my 300mm one for 2 decades, but we recognised early on that a bigger square would be useful. We'd struggled to get the really big model we wanted. Screw 6 did finally get the one I'd ordered into stock, but not until a couple of days later. But even this 600mm one was a marvellous improvement, and I wish I'd invested years ago. That's the gas pipe in position. I did that yesterday because that needed to go in place before we could actually attach the gas locker to the main kitchen carcass, which we have now done. Probably the least proud I am of any plumbing work that I've done, which is quite a bit, but the only way I could have made it neat would have been to use solder connectors, which wouldn't have been acceptable in this context, so it is just bent pipe, all perfectly sturdy, just I think not particularly neatly done. That end there is ready for connection to the hob, and before we can put the hob in, we need to put the work surface in, which is what we're just working on just now. So we've cut the work surface to length, and we're just about to work out how wide it needs to be before we then start shaping it. With the work surface now cut to length and to depth, we're now just trying to work out what shape we need to cut out to go around this corner here. So we're first going to do a little template with some cardboard. We'll then translate that onto a piece of spare plywood, and then we will use that as a template for the work surface. Just using a sophisticated and expensive tool here to mark out the next cutout for the work surface, having already cut that one out this morning using the template that we made yesterday. We weren't bold enough to cut it straight onto the work surface, so we've just made ourselves a little template which still needs a little bit of refinement, but we'll now translate that onto the work surface. Take your bets, how well is that going to fit? This is attempt number 2. We've just taken a tiny bit from the underside there, and that looks pretty good. That is reasonably snug across there. This little bit here, if I put my hand in, I can push that carpet back out across there. We just need something to hold that carpet out. And now we need to cut a big hole in that for the sink and hob. I've just spent a not inconsiderable amount of time trying to understand that diagram and translate it onto some cardboard. And now I'm just going to cut that out and see if it bears any resemblance to the shape and size it's meant to be. Second time lucky on the template. That's not looking too bad, just needs a little bit of work in this corner where I've gone a little bit wide. But otherwise, that's a pretty good fit. It's second time lucky because on the first attempt I cut along the wrong line here, and I cut out between the hinges and left the cardboard where there were hinges, which was a little bit daft, but didn't take me too long to use the first template to make the second, and that is not looking too bad. The actual cutout is a lot more complicated than that because you then have to route out for this ridge that's all round the side. We're just going to try and cut that onto some hardboard. Our concern being that if we use the cardboard one direct onto the work surface, it might prove to be a little bit too flimsy. Our sink hob unit is the Dometic 9722, which has its screw fixing holes set very close to the edge of the cutout. The flex in our original cardboard template was such we could easily have eaten into that margin for error, so it seemed like a wise investment of time to make the hardboard version to mitigate the risk of movement as we trace the line onto the work surface. My goodness, that is unexpected. It fits. Bit of measurement of the sink and hob unit to make sure we're putting it in the right place on the work surface. I don't know how visible this is going to be. This is the underside of the work surface and we've just marked out 3 lines. This is the front of the hob sink unit. This is the line where we're on the other side going to have to route out, and this is the cut line. So we're now going to lay the template on, making sure that the gas pipe cutout is over there, otherwise we've got it the wrong way round. Bearing in mind we're now looking from the bottom. That's the template fully marked onto the back of the work surface. Those circles you see up here are where I'm just going to drill some holes through. A series of holes are cut on the tight corners. Jigsaw is in place, so about to start the nerve-wracking bit of trying to follow that line absolutely precisely. What you can't see is that under my mask I was sticking my tongue out in concentration, trying to stay true to the lines we'd drawn. I was probably holding my breath too. That's the first attempt at the cutout done. If the sink and hob fits in that hole, then I will soon be found dancing in the high street. The good news is I don't need to go and dance in the high street because that doesn't fit. A little bit of shaping is required, but the better news is that the hole is not too big. The hole is too small, much easier to shave more off than it is to put back something you've cut too big. So we need to just now work out where we've gone a little bit tight and do a bit of trimming. Really the one place I didn't want to have to make some adjustment was just around this curve. All the other curves look alright. That's one of 2 little places on the whole of the cutout where it's too tight.
Right, this is trim number 5.
At a glance it may not look like success because it's still sitting proud, but actually that has fitted in the hole, and what we need to do now is route 10mm width, 9mm depth across the front and the back, which will then let the lip which has the screw fixings drop down into that routed bit and then it should all fit nicely, fingers crossed. I bought this router from my father a couple of decades ago. I then inherited it and it has sat in our shed unused for 17 years. I've never even had it out the box, so this day was my first time routing. It went surprisingly well. I'm now a big fan of the tool. All those door hinges and lock holes I've chiselled out over the years. Using the router could have made life so much easier. And that is the edge routed out. Little tiny bit of a misdemeanour just there, but fortunately it'll be covered by the edge of the sink. Otherwise, that went better than I expected. Now to see if the sink fits in it. A big yay and a woohoo! That fits, it is in. Obviously it needs screwing down, but before it can be screwed down we need to rub down that worktop and varnish it. Now, there's just something I'd better say about this work surface. Yes, it is softwood, it is pine, and therefore it's not going to be at all durable. It will get dented and scraped. However, as we couldn't find a convenient hardwood dining table that we could use as a donor, I wasn't prepared to spend, I think the cheapest we could find some hardwood for work surface was £85 for the length we wanted, and I wasn't prepared to pay £85 and cut that big chunk away from it and then potentially get something wrong and ruin it. So we went for the cheap option. We bought a cheap piece of wood, and really pleased at how successful that's been. So if it's not durable, then at some point in the future we can whip it back out, with the confidence that we now have a template that works and we know what we're doing. We'll be able to redo that in hardwood in the future if we want to. I think that's a good place to end this video. We'll pick up from here and finish the kitchen unit in the next one.